Hey folks, it's David with Streaming Relativity, home of the Astro DNA Observatory. Today we're going to continue discussing the Celestron C11 SCT. Specifically, we're going to talk about planetary imaging, which is very different than DSO imaging. And that makes perfect sense. Think about it. Planets are very small, very bright, and highly dynamic targets, whereas DSOs typically are larger, much dimmer, and highly static targets. Now, the principles of astrophotography do not change. Regardless of whether or not you're shooting a planet or you're shooting a DSO, the principles are the same. But the techniques that you're going to use and the equipment that you're going to configure is very different. In fact, we're going to be talking a lot about something called lucky imaging. And I am going to cover 3 different lucky imaging trains that I've created specifically for the C11 telescope. Now, if you're into astronomy and you're into all things astrophotography, go ahead and subscribe. I think you're going to love the channel. I usually put content out every week, certainly several times a month. And I think we have got a terrific community that has developed on the channel. So, with that, we are going to get into the Celestron C11 and lucky imaging.
Okay, so as we're going to see a little bit later in this video, the planets are really small. They range from a fraction of an arc second to as large as perhaps 60 arc seconds, and they can be very bright as negative 4.7 apparent magnitude, and they are really dynamic. Specifically, they feature orbital dynamics, meaning they're spinning, we're spinning about our own axes, and they're orbiting and we're orbiting. So it's really good to think of planetary imaging as if it were similar to, like, let's say, action photography, right? So in general, that involves longer focal length telescopes, and you've got to pair them with cameras to achieve very high resolution image scales, much higher than what we see in DSOs. And this is why planetary imagers often use very large diameter SCTs, like the C11 and the C14 at prime focus, or in combination with Barlows or extenders. And there's this rule of thumb that says 5 times the pixel size of your camera should be the focal ratio of your rig. For now, let's use that rule of thumb, and I'm going to lay out the scenarios that I have come up with for the C11. And the C11, of course, has at prime focus has a focal ratio of 10, and that means with the 2 times Barlow we'll be at f20, and with 3 times we'll be at f30. So our corresponding focal lengths are 2800 millimeters, 5600 millimeters, and 8400 millimeters. Very long focal lengths. And the pixel sizes that we're going to need if we use that 5 times rule would be about 2 microns at prime, meaning f10, about 4 microns with a 2 times Barlow, meaning at 5600 millimeters, and then a 6 micron pixel size when we use a 3 times Barlow, or an 8400 millimeter focal length. So let's just call that small pixels, medium pixels, and large pixels. And with that, I've chosen 3 cameras: the ASI 678 MC. I have a number of ASI 120 MCs, and then I have a large camera, the ASI 482 MC. The image scale for all these cameras is about the same at 0.15 arc seconds or 0.14 arc seconds per pixel, but because the sensor physical sizes are different, you're going to get different fields of view. And I think it's important to note at 0.14 arc seconds of image scale, we are sampling at perhaps 1/15th of the seeing, which means that it will appear like we're underwater, and you really shouldn't worry about that. That's normal. But if you watch the images coming in live view mode, say in sharp cap, you'll notice that some frames will appear more in focus than others. Some will seem absolutely horrific. This happens because the turbulence, the optical turbulence varies with time, and we'll find that even in bad seeing conditions, we can capture some good frames, and we can essentially beat the seeing and get down to a kind of sampling rate, that's closer to the Dawes limit of our aperture. And that is the exact goal of Lucky Imaging. We capture thousands of frames in a period of just a minute or two, and then we separate and stack the very best frames from that session. And so why don't we go ahead and let's set up one of these image trains, and we'll see this in action with the C11.
Now, I've decided that, and this is my philosophy in general, keep it simple. So the initial setup that I'm going to be testing is the smallest pixel size, which is the ASI 678 MC Pro camera. It's a color camera. And you're going to notice that there's nothing sitting between it and the telescope other than this Beta 2-inch click lock, which is a really convenient accessory to have. And it has 3¼ inch threads, so as opposed to a visual back, this replaces the visual back. It screws onto the C11. Very, very nice fit. And then the whole point of the click lock is it has a 2-inch, it receives 2-inch nose pieces. So with a very inexpensive T2 to 2-inch nose piece adapter, which screws directly into the camera, you remove the fisheye assembly and just screw in the M42 threads into the camera, gives you a 2-inch nose piece that is then inserted into the Beta click lock. And really it's very straightforward to release and tighten this. They give you a little handlebar on the bottom. So this is the initial setup that I'm going out with. No ADC, no Barlow lens necessary, because the image scale on this is exactly where we want it to be. And this will allow me to use the C11 in prime focus, meaning at f10.
And now it's time to deploy it to the observatory.
Okay, with that, I have the C11 next to me, and I'm going to attempt to slide it in from the rear. And it weighs about the same as my stellar view refractor when it's fully loaded. So we're probably in the neighborhood of about 30 pounds. Okay, so now that I've got the telescope in the saddle, I am going to experiment with the balance. So I'm going to install counterweights on the counterweight shaft, and we'll see where this needs to rest in the saddle in order to have perfect balance. Looks good. Looks good. This is ready for polar alignment. Okay, so I spent a good deal of time getting the mount set up and re-polo aligned it last night. And I was having a lot of difficulty with the long focal length, and that's kind of to be expected. I was hoping I would get away with not having to take some additional measures that I'm going to take today. As it turns out, when you're imaging with very, very long focal lengths, especially with planetary cameras that have very small CMOS sensors, you don't have a lot of real estate, a lot of sky real estate to work with. And if you're off even arc seconds away from your very small target, you're going to struggle to find it. So the only real solution to this is I mounted a guide scope, and I also mounted one of my finders. And I'm going to spend some time tonight with a larger sensor. I'm going to use my ASI 1600
mm Pro camera at the native, at the native focal length of 2800, but it gives me a larger field of view. But what I'm going to do is make sure that my finder scope and my guide scope are perfectly aligned with my sensor, and that will with main OTA, and I'm going to do that with a larger sensor, and then I'll switch over to the planetary camera. This is just part of the territory when it comes to planetary imaging or any long focal length imaging, by the way. So I'm going to do that tonight, and then I'll move on to other topics, including collimation, which is this is a new scope for me. It's a used scope. It's over 20 years old. It's in very good condition, but hasn't been collimated in quite some time. So it's a little bit of prep work that still needs to be done here before we can get planetary imaging done. Okay, I opted to forego precise collimation, mostly because the seeing was terrible, but basic inspection, it looked not horrific. The final setup here has, of course, the 678 camera in a 1.25-inch train. I did that for a reason, which I'll talk about in a second. And then you'll see that I have a 50 millimeter guide scope at f4. That's 200 millimeter focal length, and then the standard finder scope that comes with the Celestron C11. All of these were aligned, and I had a reliable location methodology. So now I just want to quickly review the back focus. You'll notice here that mine measures out to about 141 millimeters. There are lots of discussions around what the proper back spacing should be on a Celestron SCT. Celestron publishes 151. The fact of the matter is that an SCT has a variable focal ratio based on the mirror position. However, I think the 151 published by Celestron is the optimal back focus setting, assuming that the mirror is positioned for an f10 focal ratio. All right, with that, let's hop into my final session of imaging Saturn with the Celestron C11. Okay, so it's August in 2024, and around this time, Saturn actually creeps up from the east, and it kind of starts to make itself visible to me around midnight for imaging purposes. If we go back to 11, she's kind of sinking back in the eastern direction, 10 o'clock, and she's really covered by, I have no line of sight to the planet. So right around 11, it actually sticks its nose out, and I can begin imaging, but typically around midnight is when I was doing most of my imaging, and then at 1 o'clock it continues to rise as it crosses the meridian, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then she'll begin to sink down into the west. So the best time for Saturn at this time of year is in the northeast, at least where my latitude, is right around midnight to 2 o'clock in the morning. So getting old, but you got to stay up to do this. Okay, I'm not going to do a tutorial on SharpCap or any other piece of software for that matter. This is relatively new to me, and so as I develop more skills with the tool, I'll certainly share more and more about what I've learned. But for now, if you've never used SharpCap Pro before, all that matters is that you'll have a camera's menu option, and you should choose your camera from the list. In this case, for demonstration, I'm going to choose Test Camera 2. As soon as you choose your camera, it's going to go into live mode, and it's going to start streaming images to you as they're being grabbed from your camera, and you can see that happening down here. And this is going to give you the opportunity to make all sorts of adjustments to your exposure settings. So in this case, I used an exposure setting of about 20 milliseconds or 30 milliseconds for Saturn. And I had my gain set to 180 for the 678, and that's the gain setting that I think goes into HCG mode. And with that, I was able to start seeing frames come in. And you make adjustments to your camera settings as needed until you think your frames are looking good. This is also the time that you should try to do some fine focusing. And I will be doing that more and more once I get my my Beta steel track focuser in place. In the meantime, I want to, you could start capturing. So while this live view is happening, it's not storing any images. To do that, you'll hit Start Capture, at which point you'll name your target. In my case, I simply named it Saturn, and I told it to do 10,000 frames. And once I hit Start, it begins to capture those frames. And you still see the live view, but it's writing these frames out. At least it's buffering them, and then ultimately it will write them out to a SER file, .ser or .avi. You have a couple of different options there. And it's as simple as that. You're going to get whatever number of frames you specified. And I just want to point out one last tool which I find to be really cool, which is the live planetary stacking, live solar lunar planetary stacking, and this will bring up a panel where your live view, each image is beginning to be auto stacked, and so your image, the signal starts to increase, your signal to noise ratio is going up, and it's doing some interesting kind of processing to try to render some final image. You can do further processing. You can do some what's called Gaussian wavelet sharpening, and there are a variety of controls here that you can experiment with to try and get that image, that live stacked image, to start looking more and more like the final image that you'll get when you do real processing. So, and then as you're moving along, you can save it out as a PNG or a TIFF as it is going. So at this time, if I were to hit save to 16-bit TIFF, it would be based on 865 frames, whatever this counter's at that time. All right. Well, with that, I mean, that is basically what I use to capture a stack. Let's take a look at the sequence that I captured. Okay, so after capturing 10,000 frames of Saturn, SharpCap generated a SER file, SER, which I'm bringing into a software program called PIP. I'm going to drag and drop my SER file onto the input, the image file list. So it tells me that I have a Bayard image, 10,000 frames. It's taken at 35 frames per second, and this was the size of the region of interest when it was taken, and the size ultimately of these files. Now, what we're going to do with PIP is we actually want to align all these images, and we actually want to reduce the number of frames based on the quality of the frames. So at the end, what we'll have is some percentage of these 10,000 frames all aligned and registered with each other, so that we can then take the result of this to another piece of software. So let's just take a look at the input options here. In this case, I'm leaving all the values at their default. Processing options, I'm going to choose frame stabilization mode of object planetary, because this is really a disk with a ring around it. And I am going to leave it at that. Quality options, I've enabled quality estimation, and the frames will be reordered in quality order, and I'm going to limit the number of frames to keep. This is 1200, so why don't we go ahead with, I took 10,000 frames. I'm going to take the 2500 best frames from the list. And there are algorithms here. We'll stick with the default. And then in terms of animation options, the output file type here is set to AVI. And this is just telling us how that AVI will play. We're going to leave that as default. This is the output format. I could output this in SAR, animated GIF, TIFF, etc. So, or a series of FITS files. AVI is what we want. And then finally, we're going to go to the do processing. And in this case, we're going to start processing. When it's done, it's going to open up the folder. So this is processing 10,000 frames, and we'll speed this up, and we'll see you at the end. Okay, so in the end, it generated this AVI file, which we're going to open up and play. So obviously we have a lot of seeing still, but the image is registered, everything is registered, and these are the 2,500 best frames that we had from the session. So it is what it is. Let's take it to the next step. Okay, so our next move is to take that AVI file that was created by Pip, and let's open it up in AutoStackert. And this is that file. And the way that this software works, and again, I'm new to all of this, is that there apparently is a workflow window and then kind of a preview window over here. And there are alignment points that can be chosen for this final processing and I suppose stacking. So I'm not. This is all new to me. I'm just going to place some on the grid over here and assume that its analytics are good. This is a image stabilization. And we're going to go ahead and say analyze. And this is going to go through the 2,500 images that we supplied in this AVI file. And it's going to create some kind of quality graph. And then it looks like your stacking options, you can choose different formats for things to be put out. And I'm going to put it out in a FITS file. And by the way, I know this is going to be a horrific image of Saturn. And that's quite all right. And it says it's going to take the 50% of the stack. So it'll be probably the top 50%. It'll do RGB alignment. It'll normalize the stack. And it's going to save this puppy out into a folder in the same directory that the source AV file was in. So let's go ahead and do a stack. And I'm assuming that it chose a reference frame based on the highest quality image. It's did the alignment, which we already had done. I wonder whether or not we're going to try a bunch of different. I'll work on this over time and see what all this is about. Okay, so it has created a folder within the source of the AVI file called AS underscore P50. I'm going to go to it 50%. I guess we can do multiple. Configurations, and they'll save into different folders. So at any rate, here's the FITS file. Let's open up the FITS file, which is opening up in a different window. Okay, so here we have what AutoStackert created from the frames, and this I'm going to take into PixInsight. I'll probably just do a little bit of sharpening on it, but it's a very blurry average image of Saturn so far. But then again, this is the first planetary capture with this telescope. Well, there really wasn't much to do here. A little bit of blur exterminator and a fast rotation of 90 degrees clockwise, and there you have it. Okay, folks, let's call that a wrap on this video. This was a very challenging video, but I had a lot of fun doing it. You know, Planetary is not easy. Long focal length astrophotography is not easy, and I have to tell you, I'm pretty happy with the first day of imaging with this setup, and I look forward to learning more and sharing with each and every one of you. So, if you're into astronomy and you're into all things astrophotography, please go ahead and subscribe. It's super painless, and the benefit is that you'll get notified every time new content comes out, which seems to be once a week, certainly several times a month. All right, folks, with that, I will see everyone on the next video.